Saruman the White, once the chief of the Astari and leader of the White Council, was a figure of immense power and wisdom in Middle-earth. Yet, by the time of the War of the Ring, he had become one of its most tragic and dangerous antagonists. This transformation from a wise and noble wizard into a corrupted and power-hungry traitor is a complex and compelling story, raising questions about the nature of power, corruption, and the choices that define us. In this video, we will explore Saruman's journey, examining the key moments that marked his descent from wisdom to wickedness. Saruman's story begins not in Middle-earth, but in the timeless realms of Valinor, where he was known as Kurumo, one of the Maiar, spirits created by Eru Iluvatar before the shaping of the world. The Maiar were lesser Ainur, akin to the Valar, but of a slightly lower order, and they served the Valar in their various endeavors across the cosmos. Kurumo, who would later become Saruman, was of great wisdom and power even among the Maiar. He served Aule the smith, one of the Valar, who was renowned for his skill in crafting and his love of the material world. Under Aule's tutelage, Kurumo gained a deep understanding of the physical nature of the world, the crafting of objects, and the intricate balances of power that existed within all things. Aule's influence was profound on Kurumo, instilling in him a deep appreciation for craftsmanship, order, and the pursuit of knowledge. However, Aule's own history contained a cautionary tale that would become tragically mirrored in Kurumo's later life. Aule, in his desire to create, had once fashioned the dwarves in secret, driven by his impatience for the arrival of the children of Iluvatar. Though Aule's intentions were good, his actions were seen as presumptuous by Iluvatar, who alone had the authority to create life. This act of overreaching ambition was pardoned by Iluvatar, who granted the dwarves life, but it set a precedent that Kurumo would not heed. The desire to create, to control, and to understand the mysteries of the world can easily lead to hubris, a flaw that would later dominate Kurumo's actions. When the threat of Sauron became too great for the free peoples of Middle-earth to face alone, the Valar chose to send the Astari, a group of Maiar, to aid in the struggle. These wizards were to be guides and leaders, offering wisdom and counsel rather than outright power. Kurumo was chosen first among them, and with him came others, including Olorin, Gandalf, and Iwendil, Radagast. As the chief of the Astari, Kurumo took the name Saruman, meaning man of skill. This name was fitting, given his vast knowledge and the deep reservoir of power and wisdom he possessed. His arrival in Middle-earth was met with great expectations, for Saruman was seen as the most powerful and knowledgeable of the wizards, and he was entrusted with the leadership of the White Council, an assembly of the wise that included Galadriel, Elrond, and others. In these early days, Saruman was a force for good, tirelessly working to counter Sauron's influence. He traveled widely, learned much about the peoples of Middle-earth, and sought to understand the strategies and strengths of the enemy. His wisdom was unmatched, and his authority as the head of the Astari and the White Council was undisputed. Saruman's commitment to the cause was genuine, driven by a desire to see the Dark Lord defeated and peace restored to the world. Yet, even in these early days, there were hints of a growing pride within Saruman, a belief in his own superiority, and a subtle disdain for those he deemed lesser. He was always more isolated than the other wizards, preferring to work alone rather than in concert with others, a trait that would later become more pronounced as he delved deeper into dark and dangerous lore. Saruman's pursuit of knowledge was relentless. He studied the history and nature of the Rings of Power, seeking to understand their secrets. This knowledge was crucial in the fight against Sauron, but it also planted dangerous seeds of ambition within him. Saruman began to believe that the only way to truly defeat Sauron was to possess the One Ring himself. He rationalized this growing obsession as a necessary evil, a means to an end. If he could control the ring, he reasoned, he could use its power to bring order and peace to Middle-earth. But such thoughts were the first steps on a path that would lead to his ruin. As Saruman's studies deepened, he became increasingly secretive and withdrawn. He took up residence in Orthanc, the great tower in Isengard, and began to transform it into his personal fortress. The once peaceful valley of Nankurunir, where Isengard stood, began to change under Saruman's influence. The trees were felled, the land was scarred by industry, and the once clear waters were polluted. Saruman's mind, like the land he controlled, was becoming corrupted by his growing obsession with power. His once noble purpose was being overshadowed by a desire to dominate, to bend others to his will, and to achieve power for its own sake. The pivotal moment in Saruman's descent into darkness was his discovery and use of the palantir, the seeing stone of Orthanc. The palantiri were ancient artifacts, crafted by the Noldor in the days of old, and they were used to communicate across vast distances. But the palantir in Orthanc was not merely a tool for communication. It was a gateway to a dangerous connection with Sauron himself, who also possessed one of these stones. Initially, Saruman believed he could use the palantir to his advantage, to gain knowledge and insight that would help him in his quest to overthrow Sauron. But he underestimated the power of the Dark Lord and overestimated his own ability to resist Sauron's influence. Through the palantir, Sauron ensnared Saruman, playing upon his pride and ambition. Sauron showed Saruman visions of power and domination, feeding his growing belief that the only way to save Middle-earth was through absolute control. Saruman's mind, already teetering on the edge, was further twisted by these visions. He began to see himself not as a servant of the Valar or a protector of Middle-earth, but as a ruler, one who could impose order and peace through strength and fear. His initial goal of defeating Sauron became secondary to his desire to usurp him and take his place as the master of all. The corruption of Saruman through the palantir was both gradual and insidious. He began to adopt Sauron's methods, building armies of orcs, men and creatures twisted by dark magic. His fair speech, once used to inspire and guide, became a tool of manipulation and deceit. He surrounded himself with sycophants and spies, cutting himself off from those who might have been able to pull him back from the brink. Saruman's isolation in Orthanc mirrored his isolation of spirit. He had become a prisoner of his own ambition, trapped within the tower of his own making. Saruman's use of the palantir also marked the point of no return in his relationship with the White Council. No longer did he seek to lead and guide them in the fight against Sauron. Instead, he sought to manipulate them, to keep them divided and weak while he pursued his own goals. He began to sow discord and mistrust among the members of the council, especially towards Gandalf, whom he saw as a rival. Saruman's growing paranoia and desire for control led him to betray the very people who had once trusted and respected him. His transformation from a wise and noble leader into a cunning and deceitful tyrant was now complete, though the full extent of his betrayal had yet to be revealed. In his mind, Saruman had not become evil. Rather, he had transcended the simplistic notions of good and evil. He saw himself as a pragmatist, someone willing to do what was necessary to achieve a greater good. But in reality, he had become blinded by his own pride and ambition, unable to see the destruction and chaos his actions were causing. The very qualities that had made Saruman a great leader, his wisdom, his power, his determination, had been twisted into the instruments of his downfall. The once noble white wizard had become a shadow of his former self, a dark and twisted figure consumed by his own hubris. Thus, Saruman's journey from wisdom to wickedness was marked by a series of choices, each one leading him further down the path of corruption. His fall was not a sudden descent into evil, but rather a gradual erosion of his original purpose and values. It was a tragic transformation, driven by a combination of external influence and internal flaws. Saruman, the man of skill, had become Saruman the Fallen, a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the corrupting influence of power. Saruman's transformation from a guardian of Middle-earth into one of its greatest threats was nowhere more evident than in his decision to take control of Isengard and use it as the foundation of his own power. The fortress of Isengard, located at the southern end of the Misty Mountains, was originally a stronghold built by the Dunedain of Gondor to guard the Gap of Rohan against any incursions from the west. It was a place of great strategic importance, and its towering black pinnacle, or thank, was a marvel of ancient craftsmanship, built from a material so strong that it was impervious to any weapon or tool known in Middle-earth. When Saruman took up residence in Isengard, it was still a place of relative peace, surrounded by lush forests and clear streams. The Valley of Nan-Curunir, or the Wizard's Vale, was a place of natural beauty, a fitting home for a being of Saruman's supposed wisdom and stature. But under Saruman's rule, Isengard began to change. The first signs of this change were subtle: small alterations in the landscape, new constructions here and there. But these changes soon escalated into a full-scale transformation, as Saruman began to reshape Isengard to suit his new ambitions. Saruman's first significant act was to fortify Isengard, turning it from a tranquil stronghold into a fortress of war. The valley was enclosed by a great ring of stone walls, and within these walls, Saruman began to build his army. He constructed barracks, armories, and workshops where weapons and armor were forged in vast quantities. The peaceful streams that once flowed through the valley were diverted to fuel the fires of industry, and the smoke from these forges darkened the skies above Isengard. The lush forests surrounding the valley were felled to provide wood for his constructions and fuel for his forges. The once green and fertile land was scarred and polluted, reflecting the corruption that had taken root in Saruman's soul. But the most significant and dangerous change in Isengard came with Saruman's discovery and use of the palantir. As he delved deeper into the dark arts, Saruman became increasingly obsessed with the One Ring, believing that it was the key to ultimate power. He was no longer content to merely oppose Sauron. He sought to supplant him. The palantir, a seeing stone that allowed its user to communicate with others across vast distances, became a crucial tool in Saruman's plans. But the palantir was also a direct link to Sauron, who had his own stone in Barad-dûr. Through the palantir, Sauron was able to exert a subtle but powerful influence over Saruman, feeding his ambitions and manipulating his thoughts. At first, Saruman believed he could use the palantir to spy on Sauron and gain an advantage in the coming conflict, but he quickly found himself ensnared by the Dark Lord's power. The visions shown to him by Sauron were both enticing and terrifying, filling Saruman's mind with images of conquest and domination. He began to see himself not just as a rival to Sauron, but as his equal, if not his superior. The palantir became a tool of both knowledge and corruption, showing Saruman what he desired most while simultaneously leading him further into darkness. Saruman's use of the palantir marked the turning point in his transformation. No longer was he the wise and noble leader of the Istari. He had become a power-hungry tyrant, willing to do whatever it took to achieve his goals. He began to openly defy the White Council, hiding his true intentions and working in secret to build his own power base. He also started to gather allies to his cause, including orcs, Dunlendings, and other creatures who were willing to serve him in exchange for promises of power and plunder. Saruman's betrayal of the White Council was one of the most significant and tragic moments in his fall. The White Council was an assembly of the most powerful and wise beings in Middle-earth, including Gandalf, Galadriel, Elrond, and others. Its purpose was to oppose Sauron and ensure that the free peoples of Middle-earth remained strong and united in the face of his growing threat. As the head of the White Council, Saruman was supposed to be the foremost champion of this cause, using his wisdom and power to guide and protect the others. But Saruman had already begun to see himself as above the council, viewing its members as rivals rather than allies. He resented Gandalf in particular, whom he saw as a potential threat to his own ambitions. Gandalf's humility, his refusal to seek power for its own sake, and his deep connection to the free peoples of Middle-earth were qualities that Saruman neither understood nor appreciated. To Saruman, Gandalf's refusal to take a more active role in leading the fight against Sauron was a sign of weakness, not wisdom. Saruman began to work against the council from within, subtly undermining its efforts while pursuing his own agenda. He kept the other members in the dark about his true intentions, presenting himself as a loyal ally while secretly plotting to seize power for himself. He even attempted to manipulate Gandalf, inviting him to Isengard and offering him a share in his plans. Saruman revealed to Gandalf that he had long been searching for the One Ring, believing that with it, they could overthrow Sauron and establish a new order in Middle-earth, an order in which they would rule as masters. When Gandalf refused to join him, Saruman's true nature was revealed. He imprisoned Gandalf in Orthanc, intending to either force him into submission or keep him out of the way while he carried out his plans. This act of treachery marked the final break between Saruman and the White Council. No longer was he a protector of Middle-earth. He had become one of its greatest threats. Saruman's betrayal was not just a personal affront to the members of the council. It was a betrayal of everything the Astari had been sent to Middle-earth to achieve. He had forsaken his original mission, choosing instead to pursue power for its own sake, regardless of the cost. As Saruman's plans advanced, he became increasingly isolated in Orthanc, surrounded only by those who served his will. His isolation was both physical and psychological. He cut himself off from the outside world, relying more and more on the palantir and his own dark thoughts. The once great and wise Saruman had become a shadow of his former self, consumed by paranoia, ambition, and a growing hatred for those who opposed him. His mind, once a beacon of wisdom, was now clouded by delusions of grandeur and a deepening descent into madness. The final chapter of Saruman's story is one of hubris and inevitable ruin. Despite all his cunning and power, Saruman's plans ultimately failed. His forces were defeated at the Battle of Helm's Deep, where the combined might of the Rohirrim and the Huorns, the ancient tree-like beings who came to the aid of Rohan, crushed his army. His fortress of Isengard was overrun by the Ents, the shepherds of the forest, who, enraged by the destruction Saruman had wrought on their lands, laid waste to his works and flooded the valley. Saruman himself was trapped within Orthanc, powerless to stop the destruction of everything he had built. But even in defeat, Saruman's pride remained unbroken. When Gandalf, now the head of the White Council and the bearer of greater power, confronted him, Saruman refused to acknowledge his failure. He clung to his delusions of power, refusing to admit that he had been outmaneuvered and defeated. Gandalf offered him a chance at redemption, a chance to renounce his evil ways and seek forgiveness. But Saruman, blinded by his own arrogance, rejected the offer. He cursed Gandalf and the other members of the White Council, swearing that he would find a way to regain his power and take his revenge. Gandalf, recognizing that Saruman was beyond redemption, stripped him of his power and authority, breaking his staff and casting him out of the order of the Astari. Saruman, once the greatest of the wizards, was now reduced to a pitiful and powerless figure, a shadow of the great being he had once been. But his story did not end there. Even in his diminished state, Saruman's malice and spite remained. He fled to the north, where he took control of the Shire, the peaceful homeland of the hobbits, and began to systematically destroy it in an act of petty revenge against those who had thwarted his plans. Saruman's actions in the Shire were the final expression of his downfall. He had become nothing more than a petty tyrant, lashing out in anger and bitterness at those who were weaker than him. His once grand ambitions had been reduced to a pathetic desire to cause pain and suffering. The destruction he wrought in the Shire was not born of any strategic purpose, but simply out of spite. It was a final, futile gesture of defiance against a world that had rejected him. In the end, Saruman's downfall was complete. He was killed by Grima Wormtongue, his own servant, in a moment of bitter irony. The once mighty wizard, who had sought to dominate all of Middle-earth, was brought low by the very people he had sought to control. His death was not noble or heroic, but rather the end of a tragic figure who had squandered his potential and destroyed himself through his own hubris. Saruman's story is a cautionary tale within the rich tapestry of the Lord of the Rings. It is a story of how even the wisest and most powerful can fall when they allow themselves to be consumed by pride and ambition. Saruman's descent into darkness was not the result of any single act, but rather a series of choices that gradually led him away from his original purpose. He became a victim of his own desires, unable to see the destruction he was causing until it was too late. Through Saruman's story, we see the dangers of unchecked power and the corrupting influence of ambition. We see how the desire for control can lead to isolation, betrayal, and ultimately ruin. Saruman's fall is a reminder that wisdom and power are not enough to protect against corruption. They must be tempered with humility, compassion, and a true understanding of the responsibility that comes with them. In the end, Saruman's legacy is one of tragedy. He had the potential to be one of the greatest forces for good in Middle-earth, but his own flaws led him down a path of destruction. His story serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of losing sight of one's true purpose and the importance of remaining true to one's principles, even in the face of great temptation. Saruman's fall from grace is a dark and cautionary tale, but it also highlights the enduring themes of Tolkien's work: the struggle between good and evil, the corrupting nature of power, and the importance of humility and integrity in the face of overwhelming challenges.